Ibrahim alayhi salam and Sarah continued to Egypt, which had recently reunified after a period of internal strife. This was Egypt's Middle Kingdom period. Egypt was divided into provinces ruled by powerful families. The chief of one of these families used to kidnap foreign women who entered his territory, often killing their husbands in the process. When he learned of this, Ibrahim alayhi salam pretended to be Sarah's brother instead of her husband. One of the Egyptian chiefs did indeed kidnap Sarah, but when he attempted to violate her, Allah protected her. Humiliated, the chief gave Sarah a handmaiden named Hajar and dismissed them all from his land. Ibrahim left Egypt, now with Sarah and Hajar, but still without a child. Knowing her husband wanted a son, Sarah suggested he take Hajar as his wife. Ibrahim's first child, Ismail alayhi salam, was born from this union. Jealousy and rivalry grew between Sarah and Hajar. Allah instructed Ibrahim alayhi salam to take Hajar and Ismail, who was still a baby, deeper into Arabia. Ibrahim left Sarah behind while he, Hajar, and Ismail continued down the Arabian coast. They finally stopped at a barren valley the locals called Bakka, about 700 miles from Canaan. Assuming the average person can walk about 10 miles a day, they would have been traveling for about 2 months. Assuring Hajar that this was all part of Allah's plan, Ibrahim left her with a few provisions and headed back north to Sarah. We will continue the story of Hajar and Ismail later on. 12.5 years later, Sarah gave birth to a son named Isaac, or Ishaq in Arabic. This brings up one of the differences between the biblical narrative and the Islamic tradition. In the Old Testament, Ismail and Ishaq grew up close to Ibrahim. Hajar was not sent away until Sarah became concerned about which son would inherit from Ibrahim alayhi salam. However, in the Islamic tradition, Hajar left while Ismail was still a baby years before Ishaq was born. There is no indication in the Quran the two brothers ever met. When he was 8 days old, Ishaq alayhi salam was circumcised just like his father and brother had been many years before. Perhaps the most famous story concerning Ishaq is Allah's order for his sacrifice. According to the Torah, when Ishaq was still a boy, Allah ordered Ibrahim alayhi salam to sacrifice him as a test of his obedience. Ibrahim obediently took his son and was prepared to kill him when Allah stopped him, informed him it was just a test, and provided a ram for sacrifice instead. A similar story exists in the Quranic narrative but doesn't specify whether the son was Ishaq or Ismail. However, Muslims have traditionally held that the son to be sacrificed was Ismail rather than Ishaq. When Ishaq was 40 years old, he married a woman named Rebekah who was barren for many years. Ishaq alayhi salam prayed to Allah for a child and was blessed with twins, Jacob and Esau. In the biblical narrative, Ishaq favored Esau while Rebekah favored Jacob. Being a few minutes older than his brother, Esau was to inherit all of Ishaq's lands. But Jacob, or Yaqub in Arabic, tricked him out of his birthright and the brothers became enemies. Yaqub alayhi salam, also called Israel, married his cousin Rachel, her older sister Leah, and their slaves Bilhah and Zilpah, at least according to the Torah. Yaqub had 12 sons from these 4 women. These sons would become the fathers of the 12 tribes of Israel. That's where we get the phrase Bani Israel, or the children of Israel. If you remember from earlier in our story, Allah directed Ibrahim alayhi salam to resettle his Egyptian wife Hajar and their son Ismail in Arabia. Ibrahim left Hajar and Ismail in the barren valley of Bakka with a few provisions which quickly ran out. According to Islamic tradition, when Ismail began crying from thirst and hunger, Hajar sought help or sustenance. While running between 2 small hills, Allah caused water to begin miraculously flowing over the hot sands. Naturally surprised and elated, Hajar tried to contain the water flow with her hands and repeated, Zom, Zom, meaning stop flowing. But the water did not stop flowing. You can imagine her joy as Hajar tried to contain the water flow by building sand barriers with her bare hands. Hajar was now able to provide for herself and her baby Ishmael. The water flowing from the ground caused little green sprouts to shoot out from the moist sands. The plants attracted insects and the insects attracted birds. Miles away, a small group of Bedouins noticed the birds flying over Hajar's little camp. The Bedouins were familiar with all the oases in the area and knew there wasn't one in that region. Curious, they investigated and met Hajar and little Ishmael. Perhaps the Bedouins misunderstood Hajar when she shouted at the stubborn well to stop flowing. Whatever the case, they called the well Zamzam and asked permission to water their animals. Over time, more Bedouins would stop at this newfound oasis. Some would water their animals and move on, but others settled in Bakka. These newly settled Bedouins eventually took a liking to Hajar's son, Ishmael, whom they took in as one of their own. They taught him their language and even let him marry their daughters when he grew older. They even listened when he encouraged them to worship Allah, who had befriended his father. And though it wasn't often, sometimes Ibrahim traveled 700 miles from Canaan to visit his son when he could. They even took the time to construct a small temple together. This was the first building dedicated to worshiping Allah. This building was little more than 4 walls in a rough rectangular shape. It had no roof, no paint, and no covering. The only thing unique about the building was the smooth black stone in its corner which had fallen from the sky. Despite its plain appearance, the Bedouins loved this little temple. Those Bedouins who did not remain in Bakka would make it a point to visit at least once a year. Many even accepted the monotheistic faith of Ismail alayhi salam and followed him as a prophet of Allah.